Mr. Speaker, a society which forgets its past is a society which doesn't know where it's headed. And this is exactly the type of society that the leader of the opposition wants China today and China in the future to be. A China that knows only about the Communist Political Party or the Communist Party of China, and that does not give or does not surrender any sort of political space in the political heart of China to any, complementing values, not opposing values, but complementing values. So in this debate today, I'll be talking about two major ideas. Firstly, why is enshrining Confucius within the political heart of China today important for China in the status quo and China in the future? And I'll bring you three levels of analysis with respect to this point. Firstly, I'll analyze why this is important politically, second, economically, and thirdly, culturally. And secondly, my second point in this debate today will be arguing or will explain why, despite the fact, notwithstanding the fact that Confucius was a very, very controversial figure, we accept his flaws and we accept his human frailty, and despite these facts, we are still willing to celebrate him and to venerate him as a central political figure in China. Before moving on to those arguments, no thank you, let me first move on to a couple of rebuttals. First, Michael over there argued that Tiananmen Square is not a place for political figures, and that Confucius is radically opposed to Chinese identity and the status quo. If he were so radically opposed to Chinese identity and the status quo, and if he were so radically opposed to the central tenets of the Chinese Communist Party, do you really think that the Chinese Communist Party would name its #1 export to the world after him, i.e. the Confucius Institutes? I don't think so. Secondly, Mr. Chair, members of this House, if you're really opposed to having controversial figures in Tiananmen Square, then you might as well remove the giant painting of Chairman Mao. What makes you think that Chairman Mao was not a controversial figure in China? He was also very closely linked to the Chinese political system in the past. He was also part and parcel of the separation of Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau in the past. He was also very central. He also played a very central role to a lot of political controversies and political disputes in the past. And we never said that Confucius as a man was perfect. We never claimed that, Mr. Chair. What we're saying is that despite his imperfections and despite his human frailties, he should be, accepted as a central figure in Chinese political, economic, and cultural life. Which leads me straight into my arguments in this debate today. Why is Confucius such a very, very important figure insofar as the political role of China today? Let me explain to you exactly what Confucius stands for in the political realm. He stood for the avoidance of conflict. 2,000 years ago, Mr. Chair, Confucius traveled throughout the Chinese provinces which were governed by rival warring warlords, Mr. Chair, members of this House. But notwithstanding the very, very severe and grave opposition against him, he still promoted and extolled the Confucian values. We say this is a very, very important example for China in the world today, where you have so many conflicting political ideologies on the world stage. We say it's important for China to have a voice in this, cacophony of, political ideologies and the world stage. And we believe that these Confucian values of avoidance of conflict, of being nice to your neighbor despite all his opposition to you, despite the seething hatred he might in fact even feel for you, is very, very important. And we say that this is important not only in the status quo, where China is offering aid, for example, soft power to African countries, Mr. Chair. We also say that it's important for, large sticking points like Taiwan. Don't rush straight into war is what Confucius would say. He would say, talk with your enemies, try to find common ground, try to, engage in constructive engagement. We think that these are the values that China stands for today and should continue to stand for in the future. Yes?
Christian values are at the heart of American culture and were the source of many of the founders' inspiration. Would it be appropriate to have a monument to Christianity on the National Mall in Valencia?
No, but the reason for that is this. The American Constitution enshrines the separation of church and state. That's why it's improper to have a Christian figure being instituted cemented or enshrined in American society. Confucius is not a religious figure. That's why we believe that Confucius is a very, very important figure insofar as Chinese identity is concerned. Let's talk about economics. Confucius stood for simplicity and moderation, being anti-materialistic, Mr. Chair. In a world of globalization where Chinese youth are confronted with materialistic values, we say that Confucius plays a very, very important role in demonstrating the opposition to these materialistic Western ideologies, Mr. Chair, members of this House. We say that's very, very important. Culturally, Mr. Speaker, why is Confucius also very, very important? We believe, Mr. Chair, rather, that Confucius stood for the importance of the basic familial unit, the nuclear family, the basic, component of the Chinese social fabric in the world today. Veneration towards elders, veneration towards parents, Mr. Speaker, members of this House. We think that these are values that should be continued. You had your chance. These are values, Mr. Speaker, that should be continued in the status quo. Moving on, and why should we have his figure in Tiananmen Square, wrapping everything up with what Tate argued? Because we argued that this was a political center. Everyone, all Chinese citizens, their consciousness are attuned to, the importance of Tiananmen Square in the political, social, economic identity of China. That's why it's extremely important to depoliticize this space and to make room and accommodate other important Chinese figures in, within the square. Mr. Speaker, members of this House, my last point. We recognize the errors of Confucius. We recognize that he was a very, very controversial figure ethnically with respect to the ethnic supremacy of the Han Chinese. He was also very, very controversial with respect to feminist issues. He was also very, very controversial with respect to the rights of farmers. So were Plato and Aristotle, Mr. Chair. They were also very, very controversial insofar as women's rights are concerned. So was Abraham Lincoln, Mr. Chair, who was not fully behind the project of the emancipation of black slaves. But notwithstanding these facts, Mr. Speaker, we still embrace these figures for what they were, and we still recognize their positive contribution to the societies where they all operated in and existed. Why shouldn't we do the same for Confucius? Thank you.